tremendous. It's so nice to see all of you here. Hello, my name is Grace Hayek, and on behalf of the Glencoe Public Library, I welcome you to our program with Glencoe's own Monique Parsons. And as I have a feeling a lot of you know, she is the co-author of Green Gold, The Avocado's Remarkable Journey from Humble Superfood to Toast of a Nation. Let's admire this beautiful cover. In the corner over there is Nicole from the bookstall in Winnetka. If you'd like to purchase a book, you can do so after Monique's done her presentation, and Monique would be happy to sign it for you after she's done with the program. Many thanks to the bookstall for working with us on this event.
Thank you, bookstall.
And now a little bit about our presenter. Monique Parsons is a third-generation avocado grower from Carpinteria, California. Did I say that right?
That's correct, yeah.
Carpinteria. A journalist and audio producer, she earned degrees from Princeton University, Harvard Divinity School, and Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism. She has reported on religion as an independent producer for WBEZ and NPR, served as managing editor for Interfaith America magazine, and produced award-winning audio documentaries about religion and civic culture. Monique will be happy to answer your questions after she's concluded her presentation, and we'll do the drawing then too. Thanks so much for being here. Take it away, Monique.
Thank you so much for coming. And if you heard Religion Reporter mentioned a few times, this is not really about religion, although if you listen carefully, you might catch a few mentions, because I just can't help myself. And I want to start by giving you a little bit of a backstory about why we wrote this book and telling you about my co-author, Sarah, who couldn't be here tonight. We just spent 2 weeks on a book tour in California, and she lives in Massachusetts, and she had to go home. I couldn't keep her any longer, so I wish she could be here. But the story is, as Grace pointed out, that Sarah and I both grew up in Carpinteria, California, and we'd been friends since 3rd grade. And there we are, about to take on the world, graduating from 6th grade with our beloved teacher. And it was an interesting time in our hometown, which is it's in Santa Barbara County. We're about 80 miles up the coast from Los Angeles. And right around the time we were graduating from 6th grade, avocados overtook lemons as the most important crop economically in Santa Barbara County. So we kind of came of age with the avocado. And Sarah and I went on to different careers. As Grace mentioned, I'm a journalist, and Sarah ended up getting a PhD in architecture and landscape history. So she has a specialty in writing about the American landscape. And I had always wanted to do a project with her. But we didn't really think this would be it. But here it is. Our town, Carpinteria, is truly an avocado town. This is in the late 80s, they started an avocado festival there. It's called the California Avocado Festival. It happens every October. And here's some scenes from that extravagant event. And on the bottom right are some organic Hass avocados from our orchard. And growing up in California, we both went east to college, and we had kind of taken for granted that avocados were everywhere. And we got east in the 80s and could not find them. It was very difficult to find a good avocado. And I'm just curious here, how many of you grew up in the Midwest? I figured, yes. Or how about the East Coast? Yeah, so I'm guessing that you, like us, you didn't see avocados very much. And Sarah and I, also encouraged by my husband, who couldn't be here tonight, but he's a wonderful reader, and he had pointed out to me that he's like, why has no one written a great kind of nonfiction narrative book about avocados? And he's like, you should do that. That's the kind of thing he says to me. So I said, he's like, you should do that. So I was like, well, I'm going to call Sarah. And Sarah said no a few times, but I kept bothering her. And finally, she did a little research and found that it was a really interesting story. So the question we began asking was, why are avocados everywhere? And we were noticing, not only, as you probably have, that avocados are on menus of all sorts of restaurants, sushi bars, delis, even Dunkin' Donuts had avocado toast on the menu for a while. but you can find them in every grocery store. And they also start to appear as kind of a character in, on toys and clothes, and you see them in beauty products. And that square at the top is some of the swag I've been collecting over this project. So to answer that question, why are avocados everywhere? We divided the book into two parts, and we focused on the stories of what really are the two most important trees in the history of the avocado world. And the first is the Fuerte. And I have, this is a Fuerte avocado right here. It's a little example, and it stays green when it's ripe. And first of all, it's important to know about avocados. They're kind of like people. When you plant a seed, you don't necessarily know what you're going to get. You can pick up characteristics of the parent, but it's a little bit of a gamble. And in order to replicate, if you have a wonderful fruit, in order to replicate that tree, you have to do grafting and take a little clip of a little twig off the tree that you like and put it onto a tree that will allow it to grow. So what that means for the avocado world is there are these mother trees. So the Fuerte mother tree became the first really important variety. And over the course of telling this story, it's really been, we discovered it was a classic quest, the quest for the perfect avocado, the quest for the origin of the species, kind of a holy grail search. And they were really the Californians were trying to find the avocado that would launch the industry. So part one tells the story of the Fuerte. It was born in Jalisco, Mexico. It's in the state of Puebla in the late 1880s. And it was brought to America by the Popenoe family in 1911. And the Popenos owned a plant nursery in Altadena, California, near Pasadena. And the man on the right in this photo is Wilson Popenoe, and you're going to hear more about him in a minute. The man on the left is Alejandro LeBlanc, and he was the owner of the tree. And his tree bore delicious fruit in the winter and stayed green when ripe, and it held the title of the most popular avocado in California for more than 50 years. So Wilson Popenoe, the story, surprisingly enough, begins right here in the Midwest. Wilson Popenoe was born in Topeka, Kansas, and his father was a newspaper man. And when the newspaper failed amid a bit of a scandal, they went off to Costa Rica, where his father began to manage what turned out to be a failing gold mine. And during that time, little Wilson there, he learned Spanish, and he also became enamored with the avocado and all the amazing flora and fauna in Costa Rica. And they ended up moving to California, and he convinced his father, he was a teenager, and he convinced his father to start a plant nursery focusing on subtropical and tropical plants. And later Wilson would look back, and he said he looked at California as a vast experimental garden because there was so much experimentation with subtropical plants, and the citrus industry had really taken off. So here is his father, Fred, with the Fuerte, one of the Fuerte trees that they started growing in California. And what had happened is Fred had sent a man down to Mexico in 1911 to collect budwood from promising trees and seeds. And that's when his man found Alejandro LeBlanc from that previous picture, who was very generous and welcomed them in and let him take whatever he needed. And a couple years later, after Fred planted the Fuerte in his nursery, there was a terrible freeze, but the Fuerte survived. So that was part of what made it such a star. And what was also happening is that the USDA, and there's an official USDA portrait of the Fuerte, which it was kind of interesting. Sarah had pointed out a lot of these early historic portraits were done by women, which I found really lovely. And even though the men were usually the ones off exploring into the wilderness to find these things. But the USDA designated Fred's nursery, which is called West India Gardens, as an official testing site for the avocado, as they were trying to help develop the industry. And another thing that happened around this time was in 1914, a quarantine was put on Mexican avocados. They weren't allowed to bring Mexican seeds, avocado seeds in particular, into the United States because there was a devastating seed weevil that they were really worried about getting into California orchards. So it was kind of a time when the Mexicans were being shut out, but the Californians were starting to get moving. And Fred and the Popenoe family were part of a group that established the California Avocado Association. It was first known as the Aguacate Association, using the Spanish word, in 1915. It became kind of a community for members interested in growing the fruit, and also sort of the agency that kick-started the industry. And it was held in the Hotel Alexandria, their first meeting, which at the time was the most glamorous hotel in Los Angeles. And it's a little hard to see from that photo, but it was very swanky. And they were, what was kind of interesting at the time is that avocados were often known as alligator pears. How many of you heard that term, alligator pear? And the hotels, sort of fancy hotels, were serving them in salads, and that sort of it was a kind of a corruption of the original Aztec or Nahuatl name, is how alligator pear came about. But they were charging exorbitant prices, $2 for a salad in 1915 in New York to get an avocado on it, which is about $60 today, which is maybe what you still would pay for an avocado salad in parts of New York. Sarah came across a lovely reference. The writer Willa Cather published a novel that same year called The Song of the Lark, where she has a character named Miss Edith Beers, who's very wicked and indulgent. And the book describes her as lunching at the Waldorf Astoria, squeezed into a black satin sheath dress and eating nothing but alligator pear salad and hothouse grapes. So the avocado was a bit of a status symbol at this time. So back to Wilson. Teenage Wilson at age 19 publishes The Avocado in Southern California, which was a real deep dive into the botany and the varieties of avocados, and he became known as such an expert. That article is still cited today. And he also got a job as a plant explorer for the USDA. So they sent him off to South America, to Mexico, to Central America to look for different varieties of avocados. It turns out at the same time he was also a spy for the U.S. Navy, which is, I don't think he found anything too interesting for the Navy, but he loved looking for the avocados. And he also became really interested. Someone had sent him this pictograph and said, "Can you figure out what this is all about?" And he dug through the archives in archives in Mexico City and found that this was an Aztec symbol, meaning the place where the aguacate abounds. And that became the logo for the California Avocado Association. So moving ahead, the industry got another kickstart in 1926 when Calavo started. It was a cooperative California avocado that the California avocado farmers started. And they, along with the association, were very interested in standardizing and finding the perfect variety for California. So they had a list of 85 documented varieties at this time growing on trees around California. They signed off on a list of about exactly eight. And based on their taste and the shipping quality and the hardiness of the tree and so forth. And the cooperative also began promoting avocados as the butter fruit. They thought that was a nice way to pitch it. And their advertising really helped jumpstart new avocado-based products like cosmetics. The radio announcer on the left is tasting avocado ice cream. And also the color avocado green was gaining in popularity in the 20s. Here's an avocado show in Whittier in 1933. And we found that in 1929 at the Whittier Avocado Show, a postal worker from Pasadena named Rudolph Haas won first prize for his Fuerte variety. And a few years later, he was focusing on a different one from his own orchard that he named after himself. And he patented that kind of quietly in 1935. And we'll hear more about that in a minute. The Fuerte was still the star in this period. And in 1938, the Californians decided it was time to really formally thank Alejandro LeBlanc for his contribution to the world. And so they organized a tour to bring people down to go see his tree and see him. They presented him with that medal. You can see the pictograph in the middle. That's a gold medal he got. And they placed a plaque at the base of the tree honoring its contribution to California's industry. And the dignitaries from both U.S. and Mexico showed up for this event. There's Wilson Popenoe peeking out behind Alejandro there. It was like the whole town shut down for this ceremony, and there was a lot of sort of political undercurrents I found interesting. The man giving the medal is the mayor of Puebla, whose brother went on to become the president of Mexico within a couple years. So they were brushing up against some interesting political moments in Mexico. Meanwhile, here's Wilson again in the picture on the left, and he is leading groups of people down into Central America, still searching for these wild avocados. So there were some terrible fungus and pests that were starting to affect the California orchards. And the idea was if you could find sort of the original avocado, you could take budwood from that and graft it together with the varieties being grown in California and come up with a hardier tree. And then on the right, you see in 1948, a group of Californians went down again to Mexico with 15 baby fuerte trees that they had cloned from the mother tree, and they gave them to the Mexican president and planted them in different places, including in Jalisco, where the original mother tree had died by that point. So now we move on to the star that we all know and love is the Hass avocado, and we'll learn a little bit about how it took over and became so ubiquitous. So the Hass, that's a picture of the Hass that was born in La Habra Heights, California in 1926. And Rudolph Hass here, we're back to the Midwest. He's another Midwesterner. He's from Milwaukee. And he was a door-to-door salesman, and he moved to California, got a job with the post office in Pasadena, and he was probably reading a lot of real estate ads showing that if you just bought a little bit of land and planted avocados, you were going to make it big, you were going to get rich. So he took out a loan, he bought 2 acres of land, and he bought 300 seedling trees, and he hired someone to graft them all over to the Fuerte variety. One of those trees was really stubborn and wouldn't take the graft, and it turned out to be pretty delicious. And that became the Hass. To get the avocado out into the world, though, he needed an expert, someone to propagate the tree and to sell the tree. And the man on the left there in the sunglasses is Harold Hazard Brokaw, and he owned the first nursery in California devoted solely to avocados. And he struck a deal with Rudolph Hass to propagate and try to sell his tree, which was a little bit of an uphill battle. It was very controversial to have an avocado that turned black when ripe. We read many articles from the California Avocado Association where they were just really upset that it turned black because they thought people would think it was rotten, and no one's ever going to understand that it's not. But the man in the middle there became a very important player in the story, and that is Harold Hazard Brokaw's nephew, William H. Brokaw, known as Hank, and his story is in the book. But Hank, long story short, grew up in Whittier, California, went to Harvard Medical School to be a doctor, decided he didn't want to do that, came here to Chicago to study anthropology at the University of Chicago, and met the love of his life, who happened to be the daughter of the Divinity School dean. There's the religion reference. And they went back to California. He was a school teacher, but he just could not stop thinking about his uncle's favorite avocado, the Hass. And so he and his wife started a nursery and developed some really important techniques for propagating avocados, which I won't go into now, but were in the book. And his wife put her baby in the seat next to her and put the little avocado trees in the back of the car and drove all around Southern California trying to sell Hass trees. And I think it was around that time my own dad started planting Hass avocados. So I think she may have paid him a visit too. By 1973, Hass had overtaken the Fuerte as the most popular kind of avocado in California. And same year, they love to put plaques by the mother trees, and there's the one that they put to honor the Hass mother tree. So even though we've been talking about avocados so much, in the 70s, there were still a lot of Americans. I would say most Americans had no idea what these things were, or what to do with it if they saw one. And so the California industry started some pretty interesting advertising campaigns, and they formed the California Avocado Commission, where that they all paid into, and it was run by a guy named Ralph Pinkerton, and he was a pretty charismatic, dynamic guy. And he made deals with name brands like Jose Cuervo tequila and Kraft mayonnaise, and he published this cookbook on the left called the Avocado Bravo Cookbook, and they gave Mexico some credit for the avocado, but there's a map on the inside that completely leaves Mexico off the map. And they describe the avocado as having sort of a manly Spanish mystique. And if you can see, there's a pistol on the table there by the Fuertes in the house. And then Ralph Pinkerton also knew that surveys were saying women really worried that avocados were fattening. So he turned to some sexy women to fight that image. And this avocado bikini ad ran in 1977 in Cosmopolitan magazine. And you could send in a few dollars and a little piece of avocado rind or peel, and you could get your own avocado bikini. And then does anyone remember the Angie Dickinson avocado ads? I remember those too. So she had, would this body lie to you, was what a lot of them said. So she was a good spokeswoman for how avocados aren't fattening. And then the Californians were also funding research. These are a couple of the really important researchers that we talk about in the book. On the left is a geneticist, Bob Berg. They asked him to develop a avocado. He worked for University of California, Riverside, and Riverside became the sort of most important hub for avocado studies in America. And they had something called Project 1131 that started in 1956. It was all about developing like best avocado varieties. And so they told Bob, would you please develop like a Hass-like fruit that stays green? And so he spent years and years doing that, planted thousands of trees, and came up with the Gwen, which he named after his wife, which is a very lovely, delicious avocado. But by the time he did it, the Hass had already taken over, so nobody cared. It was sad, but you can still find them like at farmers markets in California. And on the right is another interesting character who has a pretty important role in the book, named George Zentmeyer, and he's a plant pathologist. And he spent every summer traipsing around Latin America looking for these wild avocados, looking for indigenous avocados. He went up volcanoes and dodged bullets of revolutionaries and snakes and all sorts of things, and was quite an adventurer, and had some really interesting reports kind of about the life in Latin America and remote regions of Latin America at that time that I think are really interesting. So while all this was happening in California, what was going on in Mexico? So Sarah and I commissioned this map, which we were so excited about, and it's in the front of the book, but it's a little hard to see here, but it marks the most important spots that we talk about in the book in Mexico and in California. But the Mexicans in the mid-20th century were also having kind of an avocado fever. They were trying to build an industry. There were some really important politicians as well as agriculturalists that were champions of the avocado. And they were consulting with the Californians. They were consulting with Israelis on packing house technology and irrigation technology. They were starting to ship to Europe and to Canada and to Asia. And they also were starting to grow Hass avocados. They brought them down from California and started planting their own groves because they realized they were popular there too. But they really wanted to get the United States market and get that quarantine dropped. And so starting in the 70s, there was a lot of negotiation between Mexican agricultural officials and the USDA to try to get that stopped. And over time, I think 10 million avocados were tested, orchards, to try to make sure these terrible seed weevils were not going to come into the U.S. Orchards were inspected, and then it was finally in the 90s during the NAFTA negotiations that Mexicans were starting to see some hope, but the Californians were not too thrilled. So the same people that were bringing you the sexy ads started to publish ads like this, and the ads were the newspapers called it the Avocado Wars, and there was some really bitter fighting between the Californians who paid for these really inflammatory ads that were trying to argue that if Mexican avocados came into the U.S., this industry would just be destroyed. But they didn't win their arguments, and here we go. So in November 1997, the USDA dropped the quarantine. They did it in stages, but it started with 19 U.S. states. So if any of you were living in, here in the Midwest or points east, you may have noticed Mexican avocados starting to show up between sort of in the late fall and winter months. They were trying to keep those bugs out, and so that was the compromise. But gradually, I think it was 2007, it gradually opened to all 50 states all year round. And one of the sort of victories that the Californians did manage to, aside from the fact that, well, I'll explain that in a second, but the Californians got a law passed at this time called it's like the Haas Avocado Promotion and Research Act that created a federal marketing order that requires all the avocado importers as well as domestic growers to pay 2.5 cents per pound and use that money for marketing. And so what that means is over time, as the Mexicans brought in more and more fruit, in 1997, there was 13 million pounds coming in. By 2010, it was 269 million. And 2020, last year, 2.3 billion pounds. So it's been going up and up. So that 2.5 cents a pound is a lot of money. And the money, a lot of it goes back to the country of origin that they have to spend on marketing the avocado. So in 2015, the Mexican industry came up with this idea to do a Super Bowl ad. And it was the first time a fruit had ever been advertised during the Super Bowl, but it's just a minute long if you want to, if we can give it a listen.
With the next pick in the first draft ever, Australia selects the kangaroo.
Yes. I like that pick. Get up, hops, jump, vertical.
Brazil selects the sloth.
Off the field issues.
Not a locker room guy.
The United States selects wheat.
Wheat.
Madagascar selects lemur. China, ginkgo biloba. Botswana selects the zebra. Uh-oh. And with the next pick, we have a trade. Mauritius has traded for the dodo bird. And Mexico selects
Beach.
the avocado.
Great pick.
Love it.
That makes a ton of sense. Rich volcanic soil.
Perfect weather.
That'll make avocados from Mexico the ideal year-round snack.
Grown with love since the beginning of time.
Avocados from Mexico.
So that ended up winning a Clio Award, the top award for in advertising, and it kind of launched the career of this man named Alvaro Luque, who's actually Costa Rican, who runs the Avocados from Mexico brand, but he's won a million awards for being kind of a marketing genius. So the other thing that happened though around the same time, a few weeks before that Super Bowl ad ran, the Haas Avocado Board, which was created out of this marketing order and this new law that Congress passed, they had been funding health studies, and they had been funding, peer-reviewed university legit health studies. And that same, I think in January, a few weeks before the Super Bowl, this American Heart Association study saying that eating an avocado can lower your cholesterol no matter what other kind of food you eat. That became national news, and it was all over every newspaper, every CNN, every television station. So I think these health studies, which have continued, have done, as much if not more than the catchy branding. So as we wrap up, I was thinking of what are the things I would love to leave you with, and one of the things is we hope that people who read this book will enjoy the story, but also that they will have an expertise, an appreciation for the expertise that goes into growing these things. So this is Mary Lou Arpaia there on the left. She's with UC Riverside, and she took on the mantle of Bob Berg, and she's developing new varieties. And one of hers was called the Luna, and it was launched into the world in 2023. Time Magazine named it the one of the best inventions of that year. It's a great granddaughter of the Hass, and it's a different flowering type, so I won't describe it now. But if you plant it with Hass trees, it can make them more productive, and it has to do with the pollinizing. Here's another University of California professor on the left in the white hat. It's hard to see her, but that's Patty Manasalva. She's a plant pathologist taking over where George Zentmeyer had taken off. She's from Peru originally, and she is really interested in protecting our food supply, and her focus happens to be on the avocado and working on the developing rootstocks that will be resistant to heat and salinity and disease. But what she's studying will have ramifications for other kinds of foods as well. And on the right, this is Brocon Nurseries. Sarah and I met this lovely woman, Consuelo Mendez, when we took our first tour there. She worked at Brocon Nursery for 50 years. And when I read a little section in a minute, it's going to be about Consuelo. There is a little bit of bad news that I don't want to shy away from. The avocado is sometimes the poster child for everything that's gone wrong. We saw this article on the left. The New York Times did a piece on how millennials are just having a disillusioned and a bad time, and the rotting avocado became the image of that. But there's real problems. There's concerns about water usage in California and other parts of the world where avocados are grown. In Mexico, you may have seen reports about deforestation in their avocado lands and illegal farming on some of the protected orchards there. And so there's efforts to create a kind of stamp of approval so your avocado has not come from that. And there's also the question of violence. So I don't get into that here, but there's a whole chapter in the book where we talk about the impact of drug cartels in Michoacan, where they're grown, because with all of that money coming in, it's also attracted some bad guys. I also hope that you will have an appreciation for some of the varieties of avocados. So you learned about the two, so the Fuerte and the Hass. I didn't hold up my samples here. But when we do the raffle, we have Hass avocados, we have something called the Gem and the Daily. But there are really, I think, 2,000 named varieties of avocados. And some of the most fun I had was touring around some of the orchards in Southern California where they have... they're like libraries of all these different types. And some are at the nursery, some are at the University of California campus. They've got one in Mexico where that picture is on the left, the little baby ones. And then there are also some scientific studies at the Huntington Gardens in Pasadena to try to grow the avocados in tissue culture, which is very difficult. And then the last thing we hope is that you'll read this and really enjoy the history. So we were delighted to find that there's still interest in the Fuerte out there, that the box on the left comes from a woman who's a farmer in Riverside, California, who sells and ships. This is in fact one of her Fuerte avocados. She ships those around the country. The season has just ended, but if you're interested, you can go online and find that for next year if you want to try them. And then down in Atlisco, where it all began, there's a woman there who's gotten really interested in their own town's history, and they have a Fuerte Avocado Day now every August, and they started that plaque that the Californians set in 1938 and lead everyone on a little tour of the important avocado sites there. So before I stop and we have questions, I would love just to read a very short passage, because I think it's nice to get a sense of the story, and I think it also gives a little sense of how, with all that's going on in the world, the avocado is not, it's connected to everything that we are thinking about today. So anyway, here we go. So this is about Consuelo, who you saw working at Brokaw Nursery. Consuelo Mendez sat in Brokaw Nursery's greenhouse at a small table. In her right hand was a grafting blade that resembled a delicate X-Acto knife, and over her right thumb she wore a protective rubber sleeve. Beside her was a pile of grass green sticks, and the sticks, each about the length of a pencil, were clipped from the mother block, a grove of Hass trees behind the nursery that are grown for this purpose. The Hass trees in this orchard never fruit and rarely flower. Instead, they are pruned back hard in the late summer, forcing them to put their energy into making new branches through late fall and winter. Come spring, the tender new shoots are sturdy enough to clip and use as budwood, and each tree helps grow about 200 new trees. The process repeats every summer. On plastic trays in front of Mendez, grafted rootstocks emerged from black tubes of soil like spindly green fingers. One by one, she picked up a piece of budwood, deftly cut a T into the rootstock, spliced them together, and wound a length of rubber clockwise around the junction to seal the wound. At top speed, she could graft 900 trees a day, while her most able colleagues managed 500 or 600. Mendez has trained them all. She trained her boss, too. Rob Brokaw was 12 years old when Mendez arrived at the nursery, and when his kids were old enough, she also showed them how to graft budwood. Videos of her grafting have been sent to Viveros Brokaw, Brokaw's sister nursery in Spain, the world's largest clonal avocado nursery, and to nurseries throughout the world that have licensed its rootstock. Mendez has worked at Brokaw Nursery for more than 50 years. When she began, about 40 people worked there, and clonal rootstock wasn't sold commercially. In 2024, she was one of 140 employees, not including colleagues, at Brokaw's nurseries in Spain and Jalisco. Cesar Chavez once lived in Oxnard, a few miles from Brokaw Nursery, and although born in Yuma, Arizona, he picked avocados and walnuts there as a boy before following his family in the harvest north toward San Francisco. Mendez followed the fruit too, although her journey was longer. She was 24 years old when she knocked on Hank Brokaw's door in 1968 looking for a job. She and her husband, desperate for work, had left their small children with family in Michoacan to come north, and Mendez quickly learned she hated working in the strawberry fields. Start tomorrow, Hank told them. Mendez watched and asked questions and learned fast. At 79, Mendez's fingers are sometimes stiff, but when Rob asked her if she wanted to slow down, she said no. She was proud of her work. Smiling, she said she enjoyed urging the others to move faster. If all goes well, 2 years after Mendez makes her grafts, the young trees will leave Brokaw Nursery and find a new home in a farmer's orchard. Given her pace, Rob figured it was likely that Mendez's hands have knit together more than 1 million avocado trees. Together, those trees have produced hundreds of millions of avocados. I feel happy, she said when she reflected on the impact of her work. My hands have touched many countries. So thank you. Any questions? I just downloaded a lot. Yeah.
So, where are avocados grown throughout the world?
Yeah.
And I'm just assuming that they ripen at different places depending on where they're grown.
Yeah.
Well, what are we eating at any given month? Can you generalize and say, like in December, we're eating avocados?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, they're grown. So one of the things that I talk about, Australia does. So I went to New Zealand as part of this project where they had a World Avocado Congress, which every 4 years it's in a different part of the world, an avocado producing country. And there were people from 30 countries there where avocados are grown. So I know they're India, China, Southeast Asia, Africa, Spain. Like there are a lot of places where they're grown. And most of what we get here is from Mexico, and they have because it's like so such friendly climate and soils for avocado, they do grow them year round. I think they taste different depending on the time of year.
That's what people
Yeah, and I do.
With your avocados.
Right, and the Californians now only can grow like 12% of the country's demand, so they can't. You really need to import if you want to fill the. So one thing all the advertising and marketing money has done is really built that demand.
How important are avocados to Mexican economy?
They're really important. I don't have like yeah.
I know
They're-
how important they are to my,
Yes.
to my eating.
Yes, they're really important to the Mexican, especially in Michoacan. But I mean, I think I don't I think if you're standing near a tree in any country, it's going to be an amazing avocado. I think it's really important how they're shipped and how they're stored. So I think if they're coming from Peru, if they're coming from Colombia, like there are only a few countries that are allowed to ship into the US, but it matters how they're treated along the way. I mean, it's the USDA controls who can bring in fruit from where. So yeah, so the Colombians are the latest to have fruit. So I've seen Colombian avocados at Costco here, but if they're not treated well in shipping, they don't taste that great. But if they're treated well, they can be good. So yeah,
Do they still collect the 2.5 cents?
they do. Yes, yeah.
So that's a terror.
Are they lobbying?
I mean, it's actually went all the way. There's been Supreme Court cases about this, so it's a marketing fee. So, but it is worth as we talk about tariffs, like it is worth pointing out. So this Hass avocado board gets 15% of it, and then the rest goes back proportionally to the country, to the marketing entity run by the country that shipped it. So 80% of the money, 80 to 90, goes to the Avocados from Mexico brand. Yeah. So, yeah.
So I'm really enjoying the book, but I haven't gotten to the Haas part yet.
Okay.
So why is the Haas the dominant
Yeah.
avocado?
Yeah.
And is it really the best one?
Yeah,
Just
that's a
the
good
best
question.
taste?
I think the reason it tastes good. I think that thick skin allows it to ship well. I think that really matters. I should have explained that more as like why did it take over? But the tree is also pretty reliable. So Fuertes are very alternate bearing. So they were looking for something that every year could be dependable to have fruit. So, but is it the best? I mean, probably not. Yeah. Different kinds. Not enough. I mean, I've probably tried, a dozen different kinds, I guess.
And how
But
different are they?
I mean, it's my favorite is one called the Reed, which is a round one that its season starts right now in California. You can get them at farmers markets and select markets around the country. But yeah, it's so personal. It's like wine. You're like, what do you like? So yeah.
Two quick questions.
Uh-huh.
How do you pick them and how much do the workers in California make an hour?
Yeah, that's in the book too. So there's and I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull the wage from into my head right now, but I know they're picked with little clippers by hand, and it used to be one thing that's changed is, and the guys carry these big bags on their shoulders, and it's pretty heavy. And I would have to look in the book I know from talking to the guys that harvest them that you can make more money doing avocados in a day than you can doing strawberries, for example. But one of the things that's changed for the better in terms of harvesting is the trend now is to keep the trees pretty small, because the large trees, which still exist in some orchards, guys are getting on ladders and they're worrying about power lines, and like we talk about that in the book too, but it can get dangerous. But yeah, I mean, they don't make enough. It's the answer. Yeah. Oh, let me try just some, but yeah.
Can you give us some tips on where to find the best avocados around here?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I would love your tips if you guys have any insights. I mean, one of the best avocados I've had are some like from little Mexican markets. If you just head a little bit west, and go into some of those tiny markets, and I should have brought the name of the one that I've tried, but they often keep the avocados in boxes behind the counter because they don't want people like rifling through them. And when you ask to buy one, they'll bring them out to you and let you pick, and they're absolutely perfect. And you might pay $3 a piece for them, but it's kind of worth it because they're really good. I think if you see piles of avocados that are, some are too ripe and some are kind of green, like I would walk away because I think it tells you the produce manager doesn't care. You want to find a place where they care. So, yeah.
How are you?
Good.
My tip is buy the greenest, if they're in a lump, habitual, buy
Yeah.
the greenest one,
Yes.
the hardest one you can find.
Yeah.
And not that has any ripeness to it.
Yeah.
And stick it in a corner in your kitchen,
Mhm.
away from everything else,
Mhm.
away from your bananas, away from your tomatoes. It needs to ripen all on its own. And in the summer it'll go faster. in the
Yeah.
winter it'll go
That's a
longer,
good tip.
but-
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Good. Oh, yeah.
Is there any truth to the rumor that avocados evolved because the dinosaurs went to eat them?
Yes, I think I read those articles by the anthropologists that, yeah, the gomphospheres, when these like massive land mammals would eat them, vegetarian land mammals, and poop them out, and the seeds were spread around, and they've survived for thousands and thousands of years. I think that's the latest reliable theory. So yeah. Yeah.
So, first of all, I love the natural lineal line of the trees.
Yeah.
That's not a question.
Is there any nutritional benefit or is there any danger to the pit? Is the
Yeah.
pit used for anything?
Yeah, that's
Such a big part.
yeah. That's a great question, and I don't really know the answer to that. I feel like I've heard that they're poisonous to dogs, although dogs tend to like eat around them and eat at least the California dogs in the orchards. I know that they're used. They can make sort of a pink colored dye. Sometimes the seeds are used to make dyes. But I'll have to look into that. That's a really great question. No, like someone else asked us that at another book talk. Someone asked us that, and I was like, I should find the answer to that. So, yeah, yeah, yes. And then the avocado oil actually comes from like mashing the fruit. So they tend to take kind of damaged fruit and squeeze the oil out, kind of like they would do to an olive. And that one professor from University of California, they're working on that even as we speak, trying to come up with a better way of processing and refining the avocado oil. Because I think a lot of what we see in the store now is a blend, even.
It's expensive.
And it's supposed to be good. I mean, it's supposed to be very good for you. Yeah. Oh no. Yeah.
So, how much are avocados eaten and then used for other purposes?
Yeah.
Like oil and kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Are most avocados grown eaten?
Yeah, I think most are grown to be eaten, and the ones that are like a lower grade tend to like it to the tier 2 goes to food service or Chipotle to make guacamole, and they're just as good. They just are probably damaged on the outside, but then it's a much small. I don't know the exact percentage, but it's a much smaller amount that gets made into other things. So.
When did they change the name from alligator pear?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sarah has there's a section she wrote in the book where this California Avocado Association they spent a whole meeting debating this, and they were all, and none of them spoke Spanish, and there were, it was all a bunch of white guys, and they all were saying, like, should we call it this or that? But they all agreed they hated alligator pear. So they
Does the word mean anything? Avocado?
yeah, no, I mean it's related to this Aztec word for testicle. So people often say, thank you for asking it, Toby. That's it. But it's true. So people often say like, oh, that means that the Aztecs believed there was virility in eating, but it's just kind of like, it's just a word. It doesn't necessarily mean that. So
Yeah.
okay. Yes.
I know you interviewed Rick Bayless.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
And I don't know if you've spoken to other shops, but do
Yeah.
they have, like, does Rick Bayless and other shops have like a favorite avocado?
Yes, that's a great question. So Rick loves Mexican avocados. When I told him I was that my family grew them, he's like, I'm so sorry, but I love Mexican avocados. Like, it's okay. But he there's a particular like brand that he loves called Alejandrina, and Alejandrina is what you can find actually at the little markets if you go a bit west, and he only will serve these Alejandrina avocados. They're Hass avocados, but the Alejandrina is the packing house in Michoacan that he has been to and he trusts. And one of the things he said to me is like, he talks about how important it is to handle them carefully, and that he says, I tell the people in my kitchen when the avocados come in, like they're each in their little cup, like a little egg cup. He's like, don't even look at them. Wait, just don't look at them until it's time to use them. So they're more delicate than we think. Yeah.
What are the kind of avocado? I just remember these giant, smooth.
Yes, yeah. I mean, those were, I sort of left, I left the Florida people out of this talk, but those were, they do continue to grow avocados in Florida, although they've been struggling, and there's been a bad pest down there, but it's a West Indian variety. So the kind of creamy varieties that have become popular are more Guatemala, Mexico, and then there's a whole different sort of type of avocado, which is this West Indian, and so they tend to be green and large and more watery, and they're grown in Cuba, and
I was going to ask you why they grow those, because I
Why? I mean, it's what will grow there.
Oh, okay.
It's what will grow there. Yes, and it has to do with the climate and the yeah. Oh, we have to stop. Sorry, one more. Okay.
Could you say anything about your family's farm?
Yeah.
What kind are they growing there?
Yeah. So thank you for asking that. Yeah. So my dad started growing Hass avocados in the 70s, but one of the things I learned as I was doing this project, we really relied on these yearbooks from the California Avocado Association, where every year they put these out, and they have membership lists in the back. And I found that I thought it would be my father's name in there, but the first person in my family to belong was actually my grandmother in the 50s. And I remembered climbing avocado trees of all different sorts. So she had MacArthur, she had Fuerte, she had Reed, she had one called a Nabal. And so I realize now that she was kind of part of this race to find the best variety, which was kind of cool. So, but they all died. Yeah.